Captain Vex Thornfield stared at the viewport of his diplomatic vessel, watching the blue-green marble of Kepler 442b grow larger by the minute. His forearms crossed in what humans would recognize as extreme irritation, though his species expressed annoyance through the rapid flickering of their gill slits. Right now, those slits were practically strobing. "Remind me again why we brought the human," he muttered to nobody in particular, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who'd been asking the same question for 3 standard months. Behind him, Lieutenant Zerket shuffled through her digital clipboard with military precision. Her species was known for their attention to detail, which made her the perfect aide and absolutely terrible at small talk. "Cultural liaison protocols, sir. The Galactic Council's Friendship Initiative requires all diplomatic missions to include a human representative as a gesture of goodwill." "Goodwill," Vex repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. "Right, because nothing says we come in peace like bringing along the galaxy's most unpredictable species." As if summoned by cosmic irony, Marcus Rodriguez chose that exact moment to float past the viewport, upside down, doing what appeared to be some sort of zero-gravity interpretive dance while eating what looked suspiciously like military rations mixed with hot sauce. "Tank!" Vex barked, using the nickname the human had somehow acquired. "What in the 7 voids of Nexus are you doing?" Tank flipped himself right side up with practiced ease, grinning that particular human grin that meant trouble was coming. "Oh, hey, Captain V. Just testing the artificial gravity fluctuations near the observation deck. Did you know that if you mix Terran hot sauce with Rigelian protein paste, it actually tastes like pizza? Well, if pizza was made by aliens who had only heard pizza described by someone who'd never actually eaten pizza. But still." Vex's gill slits reached seizure-inducing levels of flickering. In the 3 months Tank had been aboard, he'd somehow managed to reprogram the food synthesizers to produce what he called fusion cuisine, taught half the crew a human card game that involved impressive amounts of deception, and single-handedly caused a diplomatic incident with a Centauri trade delegation by asking if their tentacles were like, you know, for hugging or for other stuff. "We're about to dock with the most isolationist species in the galaxy," Vex said slowly, as if explaining to a particularly dense child. "The Nixari Empire hasn't spoken to outsiders in over 200 years. This negotiation could determine whether they share their shield technology before the Void Devourers reach this sector. Do you understand what that means?" Tank nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely, no pressure, got it. I'll be on my best behavior." Vex had been around humans long enough to know that best behavior was a relative term. For Tank, it usually meant he'd only cause 1 major incident instead of 3. The docking bay of the Nexari station was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, all flowing lines and prismatic surfaces that bent light into impossible rainbows. A delegation of tall, graceful beings waited in perfect formation, their movements synchronized like a ballet performed by living glass sculptures. "Remember," Vex hissed as they prepared to disembark, "bow at exactly 45 degrees. Do not touch anything, do not ask questions about their anatomy, and for the love of all that's holy, do not mention their tentacles." "They'll have tentacles?" Tank asked, craning his neck to get a better look. "No, they don't have tentacles, that's why you don't mention them." "But if they don't have tentacles, why would I?" "Just, don't mention. Tentacles." The airlock hissed open, and they stepped into the station's atrium. The Nexari delegation moved forward in perfect unison, their leader raising what might have been a hand in greeting. Vex began his carefully rehearsed bow, Zara following suit with mathematical precision. Tank waved. Not a formal diplomatic gesture, not a culturally appropriate greeting, just a cheerful, entirely human wave, complete with a grin and what sounded suspiciously like, "Hey there, tall, dark, and crystalline." The Nexari leader stopped mid-gesture. The perfect formation wavered. Several members of the delegation began what could only be described as nervous chittering. Vex's gill slits went completely still. In his species, this was the equivalent of a human turning pale, fainting, and having a heart attack simultaneously. "Tank," he said through gritted teeth, "what did you just do?" "I said hello," Tank replied, still waving. "Oh, and I complimented their architecture. It's really nice. Very shiny. I like shiny things." The Nexari leader's crystalline features shifted through several colors, none of which Vex recognized from his cultural briefings. This was either very good or very, very bad. "Cultural liaison," Vex muttered under his breath, watching his career prospects crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. "They said it would be easy. They said humans were charming and adaptable." Tank had already wandered off to examine what appeared to be a decorative fountain, leaving wet footprints on the pristine crystalline floor. "Sir," Zara whispered, "should I activate the emergency protocols?" Vex watched Tank lean precariously over the fountain's edge, apparently fascinated by the way the water interacted with the prismatic surfaces. "No," he said with the resigned tone of someone who'd already accepted his fate. "Let's see how bad this gets. We're probably going to need the entertainment value for our court-martial." The Nexari leader made a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. Whether it was laughter or a death threat remained to be seen. The wind chime sound turned out to be neither laughter nor a death threat. It was, according to Lieutenant Czar's frantic translation device, something roughly equivalent to confused administrative concern. Ambassador Quillix of the Nexari Empire stepped forward, his crystalline form shifting through shades of amber and violet. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of perfectly tuned bells, which would have been soothing if not for the words themselves. "Honored guests," he began, with the kind of formal precision that suggested he'd been practicing this speech for decades. "We welcome you to the Nexari station according to the ancient protocols of diplomatic engagement. We trust that all present will observe the sacred customs of our people, including the maintenance of proper residence frequencies and the respect of harmonic boundaries." Vex nodded so hard his gill slits made a whistling sound. "Absolutely, Ambassador. We are honored to—" "Oh, wow," Tank interrupted, having apparently discovered something fascinating about the fountain. "This water is doing something really weird. It's like it's singing. Are you guys sure this isn't some kind of musical instrument?" Quillix's color shifted to what could only be described as diplomatic alarm. "The sacred residence pool is not to be disturbed. It maintains the harmonic balance of our station and serves as a focal point for our meditative practices." "Meditative practices, got it," Tank nodded, then promptly leaned further over the edge. "But seriously, listen to this." He cupped his hands and splashed the water experimentally. The sound that emerged was like a cat being strangled by a saxophone. Every Nexari in the vicinity went rigid, their crystalline features flickering through rapid color changes that Vex was pretty sure weren't good. "Tank," Vex said with forced calm, "please, step away from the sacred resonance pool." "But Captain, this is actually really cool. I think the water molecules are vibrating at specific frequencies based on the crystal formations underneath. If I adjust the flow pattern like this—" Tank reached deeper into the fountain, apparently trying to redirect the water flow. What happened next violated several laws of physics, at least 3 diplomatic protocols, and possibly a few Geneva Convention articles that nobody had bothered to update for interspecies relations. The water began to glow. Not a gentle mystical glow, but a harsh, strobing light that made everyone's teeth ache. The harmonic singing turned into what sounded like a dying space whale, and every piece of crystal architecture in the immediate vicinity started resonating in sympathy. "Sacred void energies," Quillix whispered, his form now cycling through colors that didn't have names in any known language. "The harmonics are destabilizing. How did your human break our quantum resonance with his bare hands?" "I didn't break anything," Tank protested, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "I just wanted to see what would happen if I redirected the flow toward the frequency crystals instead of away from them." "Those aren't frequency crystals," Zara said, consulting her scanner with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. "Those are structural support matrices. He's basically playing a symphony on the station's skeleton." Vex closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. When he opened them, Tank was somehow waist-deep in the fountain, apparently trying to fix whatever he'd done by reversing the process. The glowing had intensified, the screeching had reached frequencies that were making small objects levitate, and Ambassador Quillix looked like he was having what humans would recognize as a nervous breakdown. "Lieutenant," Vex said with supernatural calm, "emergency protocols, now." "Which ones, sir?" "All of them." Zara's fingers flew over her control pad, activating containment fields, emergency dampeners, and what appeared to be some kind of sonic countermeasure. The fountain gradually returned to its normal state, though it continued to emit an occasional, sad wheeze. Tank emerged from the water, dripping and grinning. "Well, that was exciting. I think I figured out how your whole harmonic system works. It's actually pretty clever, using quantum resonance to maintain structural integrity while providing a meditation focus. Though you might want to add some safety protocols for species that don't naturally understand crystalline frequencies." Ambassador Quillix had gone completely transparent, which Vex suspected was not a good sign. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of cracking ice. "Your species," he said slowly, "is chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Tank replied cheerfully, wringing water from his shirt. "But we're also really good at fixing things once we break them. Well, most of the time. There was this one incident with a neutron star and a really bad case of hiccups, but that's a story for another day." Quillix turned to Vex with the kind of expression that suggested the negotiations were over before they'd begun. "Captain Thornfield, I regret to inform you that the Nexari Council cannot proceed with these discussions. Your human representative has demonstrated the exact kind of chaotic influence that our people have spent centuries avoiding." "Ambassador, please," Vex began, but Quillix held up a crystalline hand. "The decision is final. We will not risk exposing our people to such unpredictable entities. The universe may face the Void Devourers without our shield technology, but at least we will maintain our harmonic purity." As if the universe had a sense of dramatic timing, that was the exact moment when the station's emergency alarms began to sound. The alarms had a distinctly Nexari quality to them, less like sirens and more like the sound of a crystal cathedral collapsing in slow motion. Quillix's transparent form suddenly solidified into deep crimson, which even Vex's limited cultural knowledge recognized as panic. "Void signatures detected," came the announcement in harmonically perfect Nexari. "Multiple contact points, estimated arrival in 6 standard hours." Vex felt his gill slits go completely still. 6 hours. The Void Devourers weren't supposed to reach this sector for another 3 days. Someone had miscalculated badly. "Ambassador," he said, his military training kicking in despite the diplomatic catastrophe, "your people need to evacuate immediately. Without the treaty we can't provide adequate protection, but our ships can take some of your population to safety." Quillix's form flickered between crimson and what might have been resignation. "Our shield generators are calibrated for the predicted arrival window. We cannot adjust them in time. The harmonic frequencies require precise synchronization that takes days to achieve." "So you're just going to sit here and let those things eat your planet?" Tank asked, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was still dripping fountain water on the pristine floor. "We will face our fate with dignity," Quillix replied, though his color suggested he was considerably less calm about the prospect than he sounded. Lieutenant Zara was already coordinating evacuation protocols through her comm unit, her multitasking abilities proving invaluable in the crisis. "Sir, our fleet can take maybe 10% of their population. The rest—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. Vex turned to Tank, who was staring at the status displays with an expression that was unusually serious. "Tank, get to the evacuation bay. Help coordinate the civilian transfers." "Actually, Captain," Tank said slowly, "I think I might be able to help with the shield problem." The entire group turned to stare at him. Vex's gill slits resumed their frantic flickering. "Tank, this is not the time for one of your experiments. These people need real solutions, not human intuition and hot sauce." "No, seriously, hear me out." Tank was already moving toward the control panels, his wet footprints leaving a trail across the crystalline floor. "I spent 3 months on your ship, studying quantum harmonics because I was bored. Your shields work on the same basic principle as their fountain, just scaled up. The Void Devourers disrupt quantum fields, right? But what if instead of trying to keep them out, we made the disruption work for us?" Quillix's form had gone completely colorless, which Vex suspected was either deep contemplation or total system failure. "Explain." "Look, I know I'm just the pet human and I broke your fountain and probably violated 17 different cultural taboos. But I also noticed something when I was messing with your resonance pool." Tank's hands were already dancing over the control interfaces with surprising familiarity. "The water didn't just react to my interference. It adapted. The quantum field actually strengthened when I introduced chaos into the system." Vex felt a familiar sensation in his stomach, the same one he'd experienced 2 years ago when Tank had saved his life by suggesting they fly directly into an asteroid field instead of around it. The human's logic was insane, but it had worked. "You're suggesting we intentionally destabilize our protective systems?" Quillix asked, his voice carrying the kind of horrified fascination that suggested he was actually considering it. "I'm suggesting we turn your shields into a trap," Tank replied, his fingers flying over the controls with increasing confidence. "The Void Devourers feed on quantum energy, right? So instead of trying to keep them out, we give them so much energy they can't process it. Overload them." Zarin looked up from her evacuation coordinates. "That's actually not completely insane. If we could synchronize the shield harmonics with their feeding frequency, we'd be gambling the lives of our entire population on the theories of a species that considers deep-fried butter a delicacy," Quillix said, but his color was shifting toward what might have been grudging respect. "Hey, deep-fried butter is a perfectly valid food group. Tank protested, then immediately refocused on the problem at hand. But yeah, it's a gamble. The thing is, your current plan is to die with dignity. My plan is to live with style. I know which one I'd choose. Vex found himself in the surreal position of watching his pet human engage in serious strategic planning with one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Tang, even if this works, someone would have to manually calibrate the resonance points during the attack. The quantum feedback would be lethal to most species. Tank turned to look at him with that particular human expression that meant he'd already made up his mind about something incredibly stupid. Good thing humans are too dumb to know when something's lethal, right? Absolutely not, Vex said immediately. I'm not letting you commit suicide to prove a point. Who said anything about suicide? Tank grinned, and for the first time since the alarm started, Vex felt a flicker of hope. I said it would be lethal to most species. Humans are basically walking chaos generators. We might actually be immune to quantum feedback, or, at least, resistant enough to survive long enough to get the job done. Quillick's form had stabilized into a shade of blue that suggested cautious optimism. Your human is either brilliantly insane or insanely brilliant. With Tank, Vex said, watching his cultural liaison turned potential savior sketch quantum field equations in the air with his fingers. It's usually both. The alarms continued their crystalline song, but for the first time in hours, it sounded less like a funeral dirge and more like a battle hymn. 3 hours later, Tank was elbow-deep in the station's quantum resonance core, surrounded by enough crystalline technology to power a small moon, and looking absolutely thrilled about it. Vex had seen that expression before, usually right before something exploded in a technically impossible but ultimately helpful way. Okay, so here's the thing about Void Devourers, Tank said, his voice echoing strangely in the crystal chamber as he adjusted harmonic frequencies with what appeared to be a wrench made of solidified light. Everyone thinks they're just mindless energy parasites, but they're actually incredibly sophisticated. They analyze quantum signatures, adapt to defensive measures, and coordinate their attacks based on the most efficient energy absorption patterns. Quillix hovered nearby, his form cycling through nervous purples as he monitored the readings. This is precisely why our shields are designed to mask our quantum signature rather than amplify it. Right, which is smart for normal circumstances, Tank agreed, threading what looked like a fiber optic cable through a series of resonance crystals. But here's what everyone missed. The Void Devourers don't just feed on quantum energy. They feed on stable quantum energy. Chaos screws with their digestive system. The digestive systems, Vex repeated flatly. You're basing our survival on the dietary preferences of interdimensional monsters. Hey, I've seen what happens when you feed a Regalian too much processed sugar. Same principle, bigger scale. Tank paused in his work to wipe sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of crystalline dust that made him look like he'd been blessed by a very technical deity. The fountain incident taught me something important about Nexari technology. Your crystals don't just conduct energy, they amplify quantum fluctuations. What if we could make those fluctuations so chaotic that the Void Devourers can't process them? Lieutenant Zara was stationed at the main control panel, her multiple arms managing 17 different monitoring systems simultaneously. The quantum resonance is stabilizing at 93% efficiency. But Tank, the feedback loops you're creating, they're unlike anything in our theoretical models. That's because your theoretical models assume rational behavior, Tank replied, now hanging upside down from a crystal lattice while rewiring something that definitely wasn't meant to be rewired. Humans specialize in irrational behavior. We're like the universe's way of introducing random variables into otherwise predictable systems. Quillix made a sound like wind chimes being tuned by a tone-deaf orchestra. The approaching void swarm is massive. Our sensors detect at least 47 individual entities, each capable of consuming a small planet's worth of energy. Perfect, Tank said, and the fact that he sounded genuinely pleased about this news made Vex's gill slits do things that probably weren't healthy. The more of them there are, the better my plan works. See, individual Void Devourers are smart, but they're also territorial. They don't like sharing food sources. If we can make our energy signature look like the most delicious, chaotic buffet in the galaxy, they'll all converge on us at once. And then what? Vex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Then we give them quantum indigestion. Tank dropped down from the crystal lattice, landing with the kind of grace that suggested he'd been expecting the artificial gravity to be exactly 17% lighter than standard. The resonance pool in the ceremonial plaza isn't just decorative. It's a focal point for the entire station's harmonic matrix. If I can manually adjust the frequency oscillations while the Void Devourers are feeding, I can create a feedback loop that'll make their energy absorption systems crash like a Windows computer running 17 different antivirus programs. Qualix's form had gone completely still, which, in Nexari body language, meant he was either deep in thought or having a complete nervous breakdown. The ceremonial plaza is completely exposed. There's no shielding, no protection from direct attack. You would be manually calibrating quantum frequencies while surrounded by creatures that can dissolve matter with their thoughts. Yeah, that's the tricky part, Tank admitted, pulling up holographic displays that showed the station's energy grid in real time. I'll need someone to coordinate the harmonic adjustments from the central control room, while I handle the physical calibrations. The timing has to be perfect, because if we're off by even a few milliseconds, the feedback loop will either do nothing or turn me into a brief but spectacular light show. Absolutely not, Vex said immediately. I'm not letting you walk into a swarm of interdimensional predators, armed with nothing but a wrench and your complete inability to recognize danger. Actually, about that, Tank said, and his expression shifted into something that was almost serious. I've been studying the Void Devourer's attack patterns since we got the first sensor readings. They're not random. They follow mathematical sequences based on quantum efficiency algorithms. I can predict where they'll be and when they'll strike. Zara looked up from her monitors, all four of her eyes wide with what might have been admiration or terror. You memorized their attack patterns in 3 hours? I memorized their attack patterns in 30 minutes, Tank corrected. I spent the other 2.5 hours figuring out how to exploit them. The thing about being predictable is that it makes you vulnerable to anyone crazy enough to use your own logic against you. Quilix's color had shifted to something that might have been hopeful resignation. Your plan requires precise coordination between 3 different control systems, perfect timing, and the assumption that human physiology can withstand quantum feedback that would kill most carbon-based life forms. So, Tuesday? Tank said cheerfully. Look, I know it sounds insane, but consider the alternative. Your people die, my people die, and the Void Devourers move on to the next system with full bellies and absolutely no indigestion. At least my way, we have a chance. Vex found himself staring at the human who'd spent 3 months driving him to the brink of madness, and realizing that Tank's apparent insanity might actually be the galaxy's best hope for survival. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Captain, Tank said, checking his equipment one final time. I once convinced a Centauri warlord to surrender by challenging him to a dance-off. Trust me, this is the easy part. The station shuddered as the first Void Devourers entered the outer system, their presence warping space-time in ways that made the lights flicker and everyone's teeth ache. Showtime, Tank announced, heading toward the ceremonial plaza with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for vacation destinations. Try not to blow anything up while I'm gone. That's my job. The ceremonial plaza looked significantly less welcoming when you were about to use it as ground zero for interdimensional warfare. Tank stood waist-deep in the resonance pool again, but this time he wasn't there to satisfy curiosity. The water around him had taken on an ominous glow as the station's harmonic matrix prepared for the most dangerous frequency adjustment in galactic history. Tank, first wave incoming, Vex's voice crackled through the comm system, tight with barely controlled panic. 15 Void Devourers approaching from Vector 7 Mark III. They're moving faster than predicted. Good, Tank replied, his hands dancing over the crystalline controls that had been hastily installed around the fountain's edge. Faster means hungrier. Hungrier means sloppier. Sloppier means we might actually survive this. Through the plaza's transparent dome, the first Void Devourers became visible as tears in reality itself. Dark shapes that seemed to absorb light and sanity in equal measure. They moved with the fluid grace of predators who had never encountered anything capable of fighting back. Quantum signature amplification at 70%, Quilix announced from the control room, his voice carrying the kind of forced calm that suggested he was one malfunction away from a complete breakdown. The harmonic resonance is... Actually, I have no idea what the harmonic resonance is doing. The readings are unlike anything in our databases. That's because you've never tried to turn your entire station into a quantum chaos generator, Tank said, fine-tuning the frequency modulators with movements that looked casual but were actually precise to the microsecond. Trust me, this is supposed to look impossible. The first Void Devourer struck the station's outer hull with the sound of reality tearing. The impact sent shockwaves through the crystalline structure that made the plaza ring like a bell. Tank rode the vibrations like a surfer, using the harmonic feedback to calibrate his controls. Second wave detected, Zara reported, her voice professionally steady despite the circumstances. 23 entities, approaching from multiple vectors. They're actually fighting each other for position. Tank grinned, even as sweat beaded on his forehead from the quantum energy crackling around him. Told you they were territorial. The more chaotic our energy signature gets, the more they'll want to be the first one to feed. The water in the fountain began to boil, not from heat, but from the sheer amount of quantum energy being channeled through it. Tank's hands moved faster, adjusting harmonic frequencies with the kind of intuitive precision that came from 3 months of studying alien technology and a lifetime of human stubbornness. Tank, the feedback loops are reaching critical levels, Vex warned, his gill slits practically strobing with anxiety. Your bio readings are spiking into dangerous territory. Define dangerous, Tank replied, his voice slightly strained as he manually redirected a power coupling that was threatening to overload. Because right now, I'm channeling enough energy to power a small star, and I feel great. Well, tingly. Really, really tingly. The third wave of Void Devourers arrived with the subtlety of a cosmic temper tantrum. The station's shields flickered and sparked as reality warped around the plaza. Tank could see them now through the dome, formless shapes that hurt to look at directly, pressing against the barriers with hunger that was almost palpable. Now would be good, Tank said, his hands flying over controls that were beginning to glow with their own inner light. I can feel them tasting the energy signature. They're about to make their move. Harmonic amplification at maximum, Quillix reported, his voice tight with concentration. All resonance nodes are synchronized. Tank, you're about to become the focal point for enough quantum energy to restructure matter at the molecular level. Cool, Tank said, and meant it. On my mark, hit them with everything we've got. 3, 2... The Void Devourers struck simultaneously, 47 interdimensional predators converging on the station's energy signature, like moths to the galaxy's most dangerous flame. The impact sent shockwaves through space-time itself, and the plaza's dome cracked under the pressure of their combined assault. Mach! Tank shouted, and plunged his hands directly into the fountain's control matrix. The quantum feedback was immediate and spectacular. Energy erupted from the ceremonial pool in spirals of light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than physics allowed. The Void Devourers, caught in the middle of their feeding frenzy, suddenly found themselves trying to digest pure chaos. Tank's vision went white as quantum energy surged through him, but he held on, feeling the harmonic frequencies through his bones and adjusting them by instinct. He could sense the Void Devourers' confusion as their carefully calibrated feeding systems encountered energy patterns that shouldn't exist. They're destabilizing, Zara reported, her voice filled with amazement. The quantum feedback is disrupting their cohesion matrices. They can't process the energy fluctuations. That's the idea, Tank gasped, his hands still locked onto the controls as power arced between his fingers. Give them quantum indigestion, make them wish they'd never evolved interdimensional digestive systems. The plaza filled with light as the feedback loop reached its peak. The Void Devourers, caught in an energy pattern that violated every law of physics they understood, began to retreat. Their forms flickered and wavered as they tried to escape the chaos Tank had created. It's working, Quillix said, his voice filled with wonder. They're withdrawing from the system. The entire swarm is retreating. But victory came at a cost. The quantum discharge finally overwhelmed Tank's human resilience, and he collapsed into the fountain with a splash that sent crystalline water cascading across the plaza floor. The last thing he saw, before unconsciousness claimed him, was the Void Devourers disappearing into the cosmic distance, presumably to find a less chaotic meal elsewhere. Tank, Vex's voice seemed to come from very far away. Medical team to the ceremonial plaza, now! As darkness closed in, Tank managed one last grin. Told you humans were too stupid to know when to quit, he mumbled, and then the quantum feedback finally claimed him. The plaza fell silent except for the gentle sound of water returning to its normal, non-reality warping state. In the distance, space-time slowly repaired itself, and the Nexari station hung peacefully in the void, its population intact and its sacred harmonics forever changed by one human's particular brand of helpful chaos. Tank woke up 3 days later in the Nexari medical bay, which looked like the inside of a geode that had been designed by someone with a doctorate in crystalline architecture and a minor in making patients feel like they were being healed by the universe itself. The first thing he noticed was that he was still alive, which was honestly better than he'd expected. The second thing he noticed was that his hair was standing on end, and occasionally sparking with tiny arcs of blue light. Quantum residue, explained Dr. Kethry, the Nexar medical officer whose crystalline form shifted through gentle greens and blues as she worked. "It should fade in a few days, or possibly weeks, or you might glow slightly for the rest of your life. Human physiology is still somewhat mysterious to us." "Sweet," Tank said, sitting up and immediately regretting it, as the room spun in ways that violated several laws of physics. "I always wanted to be a living nightlight." Vex appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd aged several years in 3 days. His gill slits were fluttering with what Tank had learned to recognize as relief, mixed with exasperation. "You magnificent, insane, completely impossible human. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Saved the planet," Tank offered hopefully. "Proved that human stupidity is a renewable resource. Discovered that quantum energy tastes like purple." "You've revolutionized our understanding of harmonic warfare," came Ambassador Quillick's voice from behind Vex. The Nexari diplomat entered the medical bay with the kind of measured grace that suggested he'd been practicing his entrance. His crystalline form had settled into a warm amber hue that Tank was pretty sure meant contentment. "The Galactic Council is calling it the Rodriguez Paradox, the tactical application of controlled chaos to defeat predictable enemy patterns." "They're naming it after me?" Tank asked, looking genuinely pleased. "That's way better than the last thing they named after me. Nobody wants to talk about the Rodriguez incident with the Centauri ambassador's pet." Lieutenant Zara materialized beside the bed with her characteristic efficiency, carrying a datapad that was scrolling through what appeared to be several thousand documents. "The peace treaty has been signed and ratified. The Nexari Empire is officially joining the Galactic Defense Network, with provisions for human strategic consultants to be assigned to all major defensive installations." "Strategic consultants," Tank repeated, grinning despite the fact that his hair was literally glowing. "I like the sound of that. It's classier than pet human or cultural disaster waiting to happen." Quillix made the sound that Tank had learned meant diplomatic amusement. "The Nexari Council has voted to establish the first ever Department of Beneficial Chaos, with you as the chief consultant. Apparently, your species' talent for creative problem-solving is precisely what our rigid society needs." "Also," Vex added, with the kind of smile that suggested he was enjoying this more than he should, "Starfleet Command has officially promoted you to the rank of Tactical Specialist First Class. Congratulations, you're no longer my responsibility." Tank looked genuinely touched. "Aw, Captain, you're gonna make me cry quantum tears." "Don't you dare," Vex said quickly. "The medical bay isn't equipped for emotional quantum discharge." Dr. Kethrie's form flickered with what might have been laughter. "Actually, that's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. The quantum residue in his system is still highly active. We're monitoring him for any unusual energy manifestation." "Define unusual," Tank said, and as if on cue, a small bolt of lightning arced between his fingers. "Because I'm pretty sure I just figured out how to generate electricity with my bare hands." "That's going in the report," Zara said, making notes on her datapad with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd been expecting this development. Quillix's amber hue deepened with what Tank was learning to recognize as respect. "Your willingness to sacrifice yourself for a species you'd known for mere hours has not gone unnoticed. The Nexari people consider you a hero, despite the fact that you completely destroyed our ceremonial fountain." "About that," Tank said, looking slightly sheepish, "I might have figured out how to fix it, and maybe make it better. I've been having some really interesting dreams about quantum harmonics and water features." "Absolutely not," Vex said immediately. "You're not touching any more sacred fountains until we understand the full extent of your new abilities." "New abilities?" Tank asked, and on cue, his hair flashed brighter for a moment. "This is awesome! I'm like a superhero, but with better hair and a complete inability to follow safety protocols." "You're like a walking quantum anomaly with a security clearance," Vex corrected. "Which, knowing you, is probably exactly what the galaxy needs." Lieutenant Zara looked up from her datapad, with all 4 eyes wide. "Sir, we're receiving requests from 17 different species asking for human strategic consultants. Apparently word of the Rodriguez Paradox has spread throughout the Galactic Defense Network." "No." 17? Tank asked, looking delighted. "That's great. I know at least 12 other humans who are just as chaotic as I am, maybe more chaotic. There's this one guy, Rodriguez. Different Rodriguez, who once accidentally solved a civil war by teaching both sides how to make pizza." "I'm going to need so much more coffee," Vex muttered, but he was smiling. "And probably a promotion. Definitely a promotion." Tank swung his legs over the side of the medical bed, still sparking slightly but looking more energetic than he had any right to after channeling enough quantum energy to power a small star. So, what's our next assignment? Please tell me it involves something that needs to be fixed by breaking it first. As a matter of fact, Quillick said, his form shifting to excited oranges and yellows, there's a situation in the Andromeda sector involving a species that's locked themselves in a time loop trying to achieve perfect efficiency. The Galactic Council thinks it might require human intervention. A time loop, Tank repeated, his eyes lighting up with a kind of enthusiasm that made seasoned military officers reach for their emergency protocols. Oh, this is going to be fun. Defined fun, Vex said warily. The kind that ends with everyone alive, confused, and slightly traumatized by the experience, Tank replied cheerfully. My specialty. As they prepared to leave the medical bay, Tank caught a glimpse of himself in the crystalline wall's reflection. His hair was still standing on end and glowing faintly blue, his uniform was somehow both rumpled and crackling with residual energy, and his grin was the kind that suggested he was already planning his next helpful disaster. You know, he said to no one in particular, I think I'm going to like this whole strategic consultant thing. Behind him, Vex's gill slits began their familiar flutter of resignation, mixed with anticipation. In the galaxy's vast expanse, somewhere, another impossible situation was waiting for the one species crazy enough to solve it by making it worse first. And Tank Rodriguez, quantum-enhanced chaos specialist, was ready to help.